everyone. Welcome to Conversation with Iris. It's a pleasure to have here Djordje Sredanovic as our guest. Djordje completed his PhD at the University of Padua and was a Newton Fellow at the University of Manchester in the post-Brexit period, and now he is a postdoc at the Free University of Brussels. His work has been focused for a number of years on issues related to policies and experiences of citizenship and integration, has done a lot of work in particular on Brexit, not just in UK, but also in Europe. Welcome, Djordje.
Thank you very much.
Djordje is also the author of a book that was published recently by Bristol University Press entitled Implementing Citizenship, Nationality and Integration Policies, looking at comparing the cases of the United Kingdom and Belgium. Perhaps we can start asking you to tell us about your book. Absolutely. What is it about?
So the book is this one, and it's an ethnographic study on how citizenship, nationality, and integration policies work day by day in the UK and Belgium. So I did interviews with the personnel of Home Office and of what were the nationality checking services at the time in the UK. So different agents working on the implementation of citizenship policies. And I did qualitative interviews with different agents working on nationality in Belgium and with agents working on the mandatory integration courses in Wallonia, so in the Francophone south of Belgium. Compared to much of what we have, which is either on the letter of the laws or on the experiences of those who either go through the naturalization process or who go through the integration courses. These are both things that I've done, but we have relatively less on what happens, what the agents of what the bureaucrats do. So it was a way to study how the letter of the law changes day by day when it's applied to individual cases and to the everyday working of these policies.
One of the very interesting things that you do in the book is to look at the room for maneuvering, to the frontline officials that deal with these cases. How did you find doing this institutional ethnographic work? How was it to talk to civil servants and people that implement the citizenship legislation?
I didn't expect, let's say, getting the interviews to be relatively easy. Actually, I was quite surprised, for example, that the Home Office agreed quite quickly to give me and the other colleague, Emilien Fergues, with whom we did this part of research, to do a tour of several tours of the nationality team in Liverpool. So this was quite surprising. I have in mind other contexts in which civil servants working on certain teams are not accessible, both for reason of time and also for reason of being perceived as doing some sensitive work that it's not to be shown to people outside of their domain. But it was quite interesting seeing that they were quite ready to give us a tour. I was a postdoc, Emilien was a PhD candidate at the time. They had no reserves about showing us how it's done. So this was interesting. And obviously it's seeing policies, knowing what happened in terms of political debate to introduce these policies, and knowing what happens to the people who, let's say, have to jump through the hoops to have full rights. So it's always this mix of understanding how it works on the side of the institution and knowing that there are reasons why the institutions work in a certain way, but this can create significant problems for those who have to deal with the policies on the other side. So it's not that hard as some of my colleagues who did ethnographic work on the migrant detention, but still you're always trying to balance the idea that there are internal reasons for doing things in a certain way, and you at the same time, that there are people who have issues with how the policies work.
Of course. If you compare the two case studies, what's the background of these people you interview, working in this area? Are they similar? Are they different? Where they come from, in a sense? And also, what kind of training do they get?
It's quite different. But first of all, both, if we are talking about citizenship and nationality, You have, let's say, ordinary registrars, so people who usually work with registering deaths, births, and marriages. This was the case of the municipality registers in Belgium, which you started the procedure, and it was also the case of the personnel of nationality check and services. So this is one kind of the profile there is. In Belgium, every agent working directly on deciding on the implementations, it's either magistrates, so someone who has a background in law and has passed a selection to basically to become a public prosecutor, or at least is a jurist, so someone with a clear background in law who's hired by the Ministry of Justice to do legal work. So you have basically someone who normally deals with issues of public prosecution, who also deals with nationality. In the UK, the only criterion to enter this part of Home Office is having a high school diploma. And actually, what we were told is, it seems that the most common background is background in history among those who practice this. So it's quite different. You are trained to do this specific job, but you usually do not have a background in law. And even the policy team, so those who change the guidance which defines how the law should be implemented, actually do not have a background in law. They have done their career within the Home Office, within the training to prosecute specifically nationality application. So there's quite a difference.
What are the consequences of these differences?
Less than one would expect, in the sense that certainly having a background in law makes, let's say, the agents in Belgium more in line with applying specifically what is in what's in the letter of the law than in the UK. But compared to other studies that we have, for example, the study of Tobias Oehle on the in implementation of residence policy in Germany, his findings were that the manuals with the letter of the law are not even opened when you apply the residence policies in Germany. In the UK, I wouldn't say that there's this great disconnect between the letter of the law and what people actually do. What we have, as always, is the establishment of some local routines, some ways in which you normally process the application, even if it's not simply the letter of the law. But compared to other contexts, what we can call the front line of immigration policies, I would say that even nationality policies even citizenship policy in the UK, even if it's not implemented by people with a background in law, it's rather close to what is letter of the law. So there's not that much deviation. There's obviously our definition. That's exactly implementation. It's how things work day by day. But I wouldn't say, compared to other domains of immigration policies that we have data on, that the letter of the law, it's what's in some cases called dead letter. That's something that does not apply. It applies with some adjustments, let's say, to make the routine feasible, and also to reflect the organizational culture of the institution that implements it.
Obviously, when you did the data collection was in the period post the 2016 Brexit referendum. And I was wondering, to what extent, so while you're doing an institutional ethnography, talking with this frontline civil servants or people that are in charge of implement a different side of the citizenship legislation, did Brexit as sort of a political shift filter through their practice? Do they reflect on Brexit? Is it something that emerged during the interview? Was it ever mentioned? Did they refer to, for example, a change in practice as a result of Brexit?
It was still a moment in which Brexit had impacted on permanent residence applications. So there was an increase in permanent residence applications. People still didn't have the requirements in terms of permanent residence and the tests to apply for citizenship. So what we found was there was an exchange of personnel between the EU team of the Home Office and the nationality team. But it was in the direction of loaning some people to the EU team in order to process the permanent residence applications. I think that a few months after we did the field work, actually Europeans started to apply for citizenship, and they had to move back agents from the EU team to the nationality team in order to be able to process the increase in demands. What we have found, it's not Brexit related, but it's a way to show how, let's say, organizational issues can change policy. So the reason we were given for why Europeans were asked a few years before to get permanent residence before applying for citizenship was basically that, so everybody was supposed to get a long-term residence status before and spend a year on that before being able to apply for citizenship, except EU citizens. But the issue was that, according to the nationality team, the issue was that this meant that they received applications from EU citizens and they had to send it to the EU team to check if they met the residence requirement according to EU regulations. This seemingly created an issue in the sense that the EU team was used to collect money on processing the application for people who were applying for permanent residence. They had to do the same work, but did not get the fee. And at the same time, the citizenship team said, well, we are not, let's say, qualified to, at this moment, to check exactly what were the requirements for Europeans. So what they suggested is, but we can just ask Europeans to get their permanent residence before applying for citizenship. So they will have to go to the EU team. The EU team will get their fee for their work, and then we will get this part of the work already done when they apply for citizenship. So this is something that one might think it's a minister, somebody must have thought for some political reasons that Europeans should go through permanent residence. Actually, it seems that it was simply a matter of internal balance between different parts of the Home Office, and simply saying, well, they are doing the job, it's right that they also get the fee from the Europeans they are doing the job for. So this is one example of how implementation works. There are some aspects that seem that must have some political reasoning behind, but in some cases it's much more organizational. So yeah, this was what we found. And in terms of Brexit, certainly it was there, and it was also there, I would say, in Belgium. They were starting to see all the British personnel of the EU coming to apply for citizenship in order not to lose EU citizenship. And their answer was, well, we have no idea what's your situation, what kind of documents you have, because the EU personnel had these documents for international workers, which was something that, first of all, municipalities were not used to, so they didn't know how to process their application. And also they discovered, because these were special documents, the lawmakers never put it in the list of the documents that entitled you to, let's say, mature your residence requirements for citizenship. So basically the answer was, no, these are great documents. They give you specific protection, but they don't give you a route to become a citizen. So either people went to court, and I think in the end, something was passed that they actually qualified for citizenship, but mostly it was, many people were simply saying, well, give in your international document, take out the ordinary residence document, and start your 5-year time before applying for Belgian citizenship.
6 years today, the UK woke up finding out that the country had voted for leaving the European Union. And since then, we saw particularly European nationals increasingly applying for naturalization. So obviously, there was the introduction of the EU settled scheme, etc. In some of your other work, so not on the book, but in articles you have published, you have been focusing on the the process of naturalization, the experiences of the naturalization process for different groups of people, and also make a point about examining Brexit as a way of also understanding how citizenship, the value of citizenship, change over time or in response to events. Can you explain what you mean by citizenship being stratified?
Yeah. So there has been a lot of debates, at least since the 90s, on whether citizenship is relevant, whether it's going to disappear in favor of other ways of defining who gets to have full rights and so on. And one of the main argumentation was, well, look at EU citizenship. It's something that it's not national, but can be more important than national citizenship. So this has been suggested by some. This might be the direction where citizenship is going. So it won't be important to be a national anymore. You might even get voting rights. You might even get full rights according to other criteria. So what Brexit has shown, yes, is that indeed EU citizenship is more important than national citizenship for several people, certainly for all the Britons who have applied for national citizenship across Europe. The idea is mainly to get their EU rights, not necessarily their national rights. But at the same time, Brexit also shows that you have no guarantee that the rights you rely on as, for example, EU citizen will always be there. The UK is the main example that you cannot fully count on this. And also looking at the reasons, so the research I'm currently doing is with EU 27 citizens in UK and Britons in Europe, but also third country nationals who have naturalized. And this work which we have done with a colleague who was working on the Italian Bangladeshis in the UK, so people who have come from Bangladesh in Italy, naturalized in Italy, and then moved to the UK. It shows how obviously citizenship has several ways in which you use it. It can be used to access jobs. It can be used to be more mobile, to be able to cross borders more easily. And what we have found comparing different groups is that there's a stratification. So citizenship should be about equal rights. If you're a citizen, you should be equal to someone else. But what we have found is that the reasons you get citizenship, what you expect from formal citizenship, and also what are the resources you can use if you're not a citizen, change according to class, obviously. So if you are, if you have a more qualified job, a better paid job, you have further resources, but you also tend to expect more from formal citizenship. For example, you tend to expect not simply to be able to continue to work in a certain place. You expect to access international job markets, which comes, for example, with being a EU citizen, which is not something that it's necessarily in the minds of those who are just simply trying to go on with their job in the place they are. And also there's this idea that depending of how much you are used to certain rights, so it's not the same thing if you have been a European citizen since birth and Brexit comes and you find that you cannot rely on something that you always counted on, or if you were a third country national who naturalized a few years before, used EU citizenship to move to the UK, but you have been a EU citizen only for 2-3 years. It's not the same thing when Brexit comes, whether you feel that you're losing much or that you're simply making a step backwards, but you, to a certain degree, expect that what happens is not the same thing. So, for example, one thing that we have found is that the Italian Bangladeshis were quite resisting the idea to move again, to say, well, Brexit has come, so I'll simply move to a fourth country now. While some of the EU 27 citizens were saying, well, this is the first time I moved. It might have been 10 years ago, but I'm ready to move again. If Britain doesn't suit me, I'm ready to say, well, I can always move to another EU country because I'm still a EU citizen and maybe I could be better off there. So this stratification is this idea that, yes, citizenship should be about equality, but the way in which it's used and also the way in which the things you expect from getting citizenship can change according to your class, to your age, to what kind of migratory background you have, and also according to family networks. It's very different if you have, for example, parents who might not be self-sufficient in a few years in another country, or if you are just moved outside your parent home. How much do you expect, for example, being able to move back and forward? How much do you rely on family regroupment in order to be able to care about your parents in a few years' time? So there's quite a lot of difference, not in the rights you have, but in, let's say, rights you expect to have, rights that are more important for you, and also what kind of other resources you can mobilize if you cannot access the rights, if you don't have the equal rights that come from being a citizen.
In a report we just released from the Migzen project, we found out that among the EU citizens in UK, there is still a very strong sense of legal status insecurity, despite a lot of them, in theory, they have a settled status. So there is this sense that, and also we recently saw that in the context of the debate on the new border and nationality bill, in particular around the power of the Home Secretary to withdraw citizenship, we saw for the first time the campaigners, the EU representative of EU migrants in Britain, taking a very strong stance against this power, as if they felt that this newly acquired nationality, by apply for naturalization, was weaker than and less secure than what they expected. In a way, echoing what you are saying, this sense of precarity and security also is about how people, the value that people attribute to the legal status, the expectation they have around legal status, but also I think an important point around the issue of trust in the institutions that we found has been really compromised by the Brexit vote and what happened afterwards.
Yeah, one thing that comes up frequently in my interviews, but also in the legal debate, is that settled status is not inscribed in primary legislation. So if something happens in 10 years' time that a government wants to take it away, theoretically, it shouldn't need a vote in Parliament, for example, to be cancelled. So there's this idea that indeed settled status, apart from not having a physical document that comes with it, which is quite an issue for most Europeans, because most Europeans are used to have a physical ID card, which is not the case in the UK. There's this issue that at a certain point, the only advantage of the settled status, it seemed that this was a sort of permanent residence with which you could apply for citizenship with less requirements than before. But even that changed, because the current guidance says that you still have to get your test. So you still have to pass the Life UK and the language test to apply for citizenship. And EU citizens are supposed to be examined for the 10 years before whether they complied with the different immigration regulations, which is obviously an issue because, for example, the Home Office has never clarified what is the role of the comprehensive sickness insurance document. My impression from an agent we interviewed in Liverpool is that this should not be something that the Home Office checks in practice, but again, there's no clear data on whether people who were, for example, relying on either being here as a student or relying on the fact that their partner was in employment and they did not have comprehensive sickness insurance, whether they respected or not the immigration regulations, or whether they are eligible for citizenship or not. So there's also this issue. But more generally, I would say that, yeah, there's many have naturalized exactly because the idea was I cannot trust the UK government anymore. Having had the rights taken away, the idea is, at least with citizenship, this is something that is harder to take away. I could still be denaturalized for a number of reasons, but at least it's not something that could be collectively taken away from a day to another, as it happened, for example, with people, Europeans with permanent residence. It was supposed to be permanent, and they still had to apply for settled status, which means that effectively they were collectively deprived of a status that was supposed to be permanent, that was supposed to be something that they could rely on. So there's, in many of the interviews I conducted, there's general idea if some rights can be taken away collectively in a short period of time, at least citizenship should be something that is taken away individually and only in exceptional cases only.
A lot of recent research, in particular, I'm thinking at work by Kuba Joblanowski and colleagues, is focusing on the digitalization of immigration governance, in particular, the fact that you mentioned that, there is no longer a piece of paper that give you a deadline or really give you an ID card that you can show when you cross the borders, but it's all basically in a computer somewhere, and you don't really have necessarily control of these documents. And this research is pointing out the extent to which this digitalization produce a sense of insecurity that is by design, is not a side effect. In a sense, is by design, by introducing this meaning, also create a sense of precarity, of vulnerability, of wanted to project this sense that people can be taken away, the right to stay can be removed and taken away. And I was wondering, from the research with the civil servants, in a sense, from the other side, the people that implement this policy, is something that came out around this issue of digitalization. Was it mentioned?
Not necessarily digitalization, but one detail that, let's say, it's very clear from the Home Office in the UK is this extreme attention to potential fraud. So compared to Belgium, where fraud was not mentioned at all, there's a lot of worries about whether the document you have in front of you is authentic, whether people are simply forging documents or, for example, producing university diplomas they didn't actually obtain, so things like that. So I can see in a way that this culture of mistrust, of fear of fraud, which exists within Home Office, could be one of the reasons why the issue is, well, let's get a digital status so you don't have a physical document you can forge. You either have to be in a database, and this is the only way we can check that you exist as someone holding rights, or if you are not in the database, if the database does not recognize you, then you simply do not exist. One interesting thing that's happened, on the other hand, is with the Windrush scandal, which is one of the proof that actually, if you had a physical document to prove that you arrived in the UK before legislation was changing, so you were entitled to stay in the UK without having further procedures done. With the scandal happened, people from who have, I don't remember how many decades in the UK, have now access to a physical document proving that they are actually of the Windrush generation. And the interesting thing is, this is not limited to people who have come from the former colonies. I actually interviewed a Dutch gentleman who is here from, I think, the 60s, who was not willing to naturalize because he didn't feel British, but he said, well, I have enough decades in the UK to get this physical document which was designed for the Windrush generation, and this can give me, let's say, the certainty that the settled status does not give me, because I've been in the UK long enough that I'm assimilated to the Windrush generation, so I can somehow get a sort of physical document which I would not be otherwise able to have, because I cannot apply for other statuses that the settled status does not give me a physical document. So this is the only way I can feel safe without needing to become British.
In our research, we came across a number of elderly people who were Italian immigrants from before the membership of the European Union. People had been here from the 50s and before. And they were pointing out to the fact that they had lost any paper to demonstrate when they arrived in the country, because in many ways, often this was a visa on a passport that was long expired. And when you renew your passport, it doesn't have a proof that when you arrived, you lost the stamp. And this was creating problem during the, especially in the first stage of the EU settled status. I think was an issue that emerged a lot. Just to close, because where is your research going? What's coming next in your research agenda?
So I'm continuing my research on Brexit, and I'm in this moment re-interviewing people. Some of my first interviews. So this research has gone on for 5 years. So quite a number of years has passed from the first interviews to see how Brexit has evolved and what they've done. So I'm finding some people who have had to change jobs or who apply for citizenship after not being so sure, but also people who are just still waiting it through and seeing what will happen. And even if Brexit is theoretically done, and this was the claim of the government, there's still a lot of things to see how it will evolve. And also there's the issue of what will happen in 10 years' time when these EU citizens will become, let's say, a legacy of a previous policy change. So another thing which I'm exploring as a potential line of research is what happens to all the people who have become legacies of former changes to policy migration. So obviously those who are here have been here enough to have arrived before the restrictions to migrations from the colonies, but also, for example, the UK is one of the few countries who never did away with several partial citizenships. So British protected person, British subjects, and so on are all people who have specific sets of rights which might not be that limited, but which rely on something that was policy decades ago, that it's not anymore, let's say, on the agenda of the Home Office. So the issue which I'm finding potentially is that people might be in a bad position, not because they lack rights, but because they fall in between different policy changes, and the new policy changes might not consider that they have created several legacy statuses which you cannot get anymore, but you still hold until you're living. And you might find yourself, as with the individual scandal, but it can happen to other groups, that you felt you were secure enough because people who arrived after you had it worse, but you don't know what will happen when the policy changes and your specific situation is not fully considered. Then you might find yourself, as with the Winter generation, that you're losing rights not because you didn't have rights in the first place, but because you had more rights than the others, and you are, let's say, a legacy that is not considered anymore in the projects of the Home Office.
Yeah, this is an area that we have been also exploring with the Euro Children project from a more sense of belonging perspective, in a sense when you are, we call it when you are an orphan of the EU project. And similarly, if you study, I did my work on former Yugoslavia, and working with Roma, there was all these people that in a sense, they intermarried because they were part of the Yugoslavian project, the Yugoslavian identity, when Yugoslavia as a geopolitical project was no longer there. They are left as a legacies, and the same thing with the Soviet Union in many ways. And in one of the research of the interview I did for the Euro Children project, I ended up interviewing someone who was an orphan of the Soviet project and then becoming also an orphan of the EU project. So it was someone who was from the Baltic countries who basically had all these layers of passports over. And it's a fascinating, from a biographical research project, this is a fascinating area. Thank you, Djordje, for joining the conversation with Iris. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and we hope to meet again.
Absolutely. Bye. Thank you very much, Ando.
Bye-bye.
Bye.